Okay, I think maybe that we can get started and we'll do a little bit of introduction. So if anyone is still joining, they won't miss too much. But my name is Amanda Herring, and I am the manager of Jewish Life and Learning at the Edlovich DC JCC. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And I want to extend a warm welcome to the author that we're speaking with this evening, Leslie Berry, who's going to be speaking about her book, Newark Minutemen. And I just want to thank you all for joining us. We've been bringing some author series to the JCC lately. And if you have any thoughts or feedback after the call, I'm available. My name again is Amanda Herring, and I would love to hear your thoughts about the programs that we offer at the JCC and things that you would like to see. I love to hear from you. But without further ado, as I said at the beginning, please write any questions you have in the chat box. You should be able to select chat at the bottom of your screen, and we'll collect all of those for Leslie at the end. But I want to begin by extending a warm welcome to Leslie and saying, please introduce yourself, talk a little bit about the books so that we have an idea of the content we're speaking about tonight, and we'll share some content and media as you speak. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Amanda, and thank you so much for having me. As you know, I grew up in Maryland. I live out on the West Coast now, but I did grow up in Maryland, and so it feels very special to be talking to this group. And I know I have some friends on here, Paula and my niece, Marissa, and I'm not sure who else, but thank you everyone for joining in and supporting. So as Amanda said, I have just published a book called Newark Minutemen, and as well it's an optioned movie as well. So it is a story that's based on my own family, my uncle, and my mom. I spent hours and hours and hours talking to her about all the details of the period growing up, and that was an incredible experience. So this book is, I've tried to really make it authentic. There are some fictionalized parts and condensed timelines, and I can sort of point those out. But let me give you, first of all, an idea about the book. So Newark Minutemen is a book that is a mixture of action, a lot of violence and unrest and fighting, as well as drama, which is a love story and a romantic love story. And but the love story is actually a star-crossed love story that's doomed for failure. And so this story takes place in Newark, New Jersey, back in the 1930s, and it's set across a forgotten or little-known historical backdrop that was the backdrop of what was once our rising German-American Nazi Party in America during the Depression. And so the story itself, it follows a Jewish boxer, and his name is Yael. He is part of a group of boxers called the Newark Minutemen, and the Newark Minutemen was organized by, back then, the Jewish mafia and our government. And the Newark Minutemen was set up to go out and fight this German party called the Bund. They were set up to go undercover as a resistance in New Jersey, as well as there were other groups going on across the country, but this particular group was a big force in New Jersey. And along the way, Yael falls in love with Krista, who happens to be the daughter of the head of the Bund, who is the enemy. So Jewish boxer falls in love with German-American Bund girl. So as you can imagine, that creates a lot of conflict, and that's overlaid on this historical backdrop of a world that was within great conflict. And the way I wrote this story was through 4 narrators. You've got both the good guys and the bad guys telling the story. So you have Yael's perspective, Krista's perspective, the mob king, whose name was Longy's woman's perspective, and Führer Fritz Kuhn, who was this self-proclaimed American Hitler of our country. And the reason I did that was because I wanted the reader to really connect to each of these characters. I wanted the reader to understand their past and why they were here, and to see both sides of the kindness of the hero and the villain, and the wickedness of the hero and the villain, and also the mistakes of the hero and the villain, because it was a confusing time back then, and it was hard to understand why in the world we'd even have an American Hitler, or why in the world the head of the mob would be approached by the government. So through these 4 characters' eyes, the reader can then examines why America actually closed our eyes to this satellite that Hitler was building in America for his Nazi empire. And in fact, this story has been buried. I didn't learn about it in school. I don't know if you all did either, but certainly if it had come true, we'd be living a different kind of history, or we'd be living differently today, I should say. So where did this story come from? So growing up, so my mom, she was born in 1925, and she's still around, she's going strong. My niece Marissa, who's on here today, can tell you she's very clear-headed and talks a lot. So she grew up in Newark, New Jersey. She was the daughter of immigrants who had escaped from Russia during the pogroms period. She had 4 older brothers, and they all lived in this melting pot of Newark with all these different cultures and people from different countries. And so she told us all of these stories growing up. Obviously she lived through the Great Depression, and she lived through World War II, and her cousin escaped from Auschwitz, and she told us all these stories. And so some we listened to, some we didn't, some we understood, some we didn't. And we'd always grown up with this story, knowing about her older brother, our Uncle Harry. He was a prize-fighting boxer, and we knew it because there's actually a newspaper article, and we had seen the trophy of our Uncle Harry. But it wasn't until her 90th birthday where all these cousins and her were talking about how Uncle Harry used to go out and beat up the Nazis. And I was like, well, what do you mean beat up the Nazis? You mean like when he was in the war over in Germany? And they all were like, no, there were actually Nazis in Newark. And they were walking down the avenues dressed up in the smuggled Hitler uniforms with their arms waving in the air. And he would come home all beat up, and their mother would be mad at him. And it turns out that he was part of this group. So after I heard that story, my cousin and I I became possessed with this story, and my cousin and I started researching it, and we uncovered all these FBI documents and diaries and archives and photos of this incredible period that was going on. And as I dug deeper and deeper, I interviewed people that knew about the mafia's part in it, and about the Newark Minutemen working to fight this group. So at the top, and maybe now, Amanda, you can show some pictures as I talk, because when I saw these pictures, I was chilled. So I'll wait for some of the photos to come up. So for instance, this was right in New Jersey. It's called Camp Nordland. As you can see, it looks like Germany until you see the American flag side by side with a swastika flag. And you can just scroll through some of these pictures as I talk, but this is Führer Kuhn at one of the camps. The kids are being indoctrinated, walking right by. They were trained in all the Nazi doctrine. They were trained with guns. So actually, one thing that this Führer Kuhn did was he set up 6 companies with underneath the Bund. One was for newspapers, one were for his fighters, one were for these Nazi youth camps. He would buy all this land. He bought 25 camps across the country, and he had these youth camps where he would train and prepare and recruit kids to these camps. And in fact, one of the stories that came out that I discovered in the FBI documents, there was one of the girls testified that in the camp in Yaphank, Long Island, they were actually raping the girls with the goal of increasing the Aryan population in America. But you can see, so here, this is a Benny Levine. He was one of the Newark Minutemen. And in fact, on my website, I'm creating a whole gallery of all these Minutemen as people reach out. But here's another camp of one of the stories was they always raised the Nazi flag higher than the American flag. This was one of the earlier camps before they had the full organized uniforms. This is another event at one of the camps with all of the soldiers marching. Again, this is America before the war, in between the wars. And what Amanda has brought up right now is when I saw, so this is a video, it's documented an event that happened in 1939 on President's Day. This is 6 months before Hitler invades Poland. And the goal of this meeting was for Fritz Kuhn, the American Hitler, to galvanize the Nazi Party to be strong enough to actually have a president as a candidate to run for president. And they were talking about Charles Lindbergh. If anybody's seen Plot Against America, that's some of that was sort of true story as well. So why don't we run this, and you can see after I saw this video, I was like, I've got to tell this story.
All right, let me know if the audio works.
I can hear it, yes.
Great.
February 20th, 1939. Just months before Hitler invades Poland and ignites the deadliest war in history, thousands of Nazis gather for a rally at an indoor arena. But this isn't Nuremberg or Berlin. This is Madison Square Garden in New York City.
You all have heard of me through the Jewish-controlled press.
And the man speaking isn't a member of Adolf Hitler's inner circle. He's Fritz Julius Kuhn, a U.S. citizen and head of the German-American Bund, or association.
Kuhn wanted a rally to celebrate George Washington's birthday. The first American fascist is what they called him. They signed a contract with Madison Square Garden. Said, okay, we agree. No swastikas, no anti-Semitic signs, none of that stuff. Of course, once the contracts were signed, those agreements went out the window.
This program was produced for the German-American Bund rally.
We love him for the enemies he has made. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Fritz Kuhn.
Kuhn then went on to deliver a very, very predictable and very, very typical National Socialist stump speech about racism and the Jewish conspiracy and the communists and how everybody's an enemy and everybody has to be alike.
We, the German American Bund, organized as American citizens with American ideals and determined to protest ourselves, our homes, our wives and children against the slimy conspirators and the parasite pen of Jewish communism in our schools, our universities, our very homes.
Great. So, yeah, I mean, I couldn't believe this is our Madison Square Garden in 1939. And I imagine you're kind of asking the same question I did, was like, how could we let this go on? How could this happen? And one of the problems was First Amendment rights. People had every right to assemble and freedom of speech. And, you know, where does that stop and start? We struggle with that today. But these guys, like I said, they were marching down our streets. And so what happened was, this is when our government went to our Jewish mafia, who in the 1930s, so knowing history, 1929, we had the crash, everybody loses their money. Who's the group that has money? The mafia, because of bootlegging. So they were a very powerful group at the time in the 30s. They had the money, the jobs, the power. They would put people in office. So our government went to them, and Meyer Lansky was the head of the Jewish mob, and they went to him and they said, look, can you help us? We need to stop this obnoxious thing that's going on in our country, and we'll pay you. And Meyer Lansky said, look, you don't need to pay me. You just look the other way and we'll take care of it. Meyer went to his buddy Longies Willman in New Jersey, who at that time, the mob ran all the betting for boxing, and Jewish boxers there were more Jewish boxers at the time in the 30s than any other group. And so Longy went to this former boxer, Nat Arno, and he said, Nat, I want you to kind of be this captain of the Newark Minutemen, train them, have them be ready on a minute's notice, give them $100, which was a lot of money back then, every time they go out, and stop this party and be a resistance. And my Uncle Harry was one of these Newark Minutemen. So basically, you have this story of revenge. I didn't tell you sort of the beginning of the story, but Yael is driven by revenge, and that's why he joins the Newark Minutemen. This unholy alliance between our mob and our government, and this forbidden love between a Jewish boxer and a German American girl. So that's the story that I hope people will embrace, and it's sort of a hole in our history. So I thought it was a really important one to tell.
Thank you so much, Leslie. I think it's not a story everyone has heard. So thank you for bringing it to the light and sharing your family's story. There were many parts of the book that I found really resonated with the political climate of today. The fear of fascism and rising anti-Semitism in the United States. Do you think that your readers, what do you think that people can learn from this book?
I'm glad you pulled that away. And I think what happens is, number one, when people lose faith in a government, which is what they did in the 1930s, and I think to some extent or a great extent today, I think they look for other options. They look right and they look left, and they also look for an enemy to blame. And not that anti-Semitism hasn't been going on for a while here, but I think in the past 4 years, factually, I believe there's been a rise. And I think that it's, when, like I said, that there's, you have to blame your problems on somebody, or that's what an anti-hero does. And I think that's what's somewhat happening in our country. And I think we, just like these Newark Minutemen, I think it's really important not to be complacent. And I even find myself, I try to be sort of politically correct when I'm promoting this book, but I'm like, no, I have to say what's wrong here. And I think it's really important to not be afraid to speak up and do something, and think, and don't let people, then don't think that everybody else is going to take care of the problem.
Yeah, that's an important message. I know that in your experience, you have done a lot of screenplay writing. And I was wondering if you were able to translate those skills for this novel, or did you find it difficult to shift the way that you write? Was it a challenge you enjoyed?
Honestly, it was so much harder than I thought because I figured I had kept the book rights when I sold the screenplay first. I'd kept the book rights and I thought, gosh, I have the timeline, I have the characters. This is going to be easy. But what the hard part was, in a screenplay, you have to show everything, right? You have to show that the boy walks across the room and picks up the plate or whatever. And in a book, there's a lot of thinking and reflection. And when my first drafts, I would actually show people and they'd be like, this sounds like a screenplay. I'm like, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? And finally, I was working with an editor and she said, go grab Hunger Games. I said, okay. And I went and grabbed Hunger Games. And if you look at the first couple pages, it is the best example of first person perspective of the who was her, Katniss or whatever, thinking. And she's thinking, she looks over and where's my sister? And I'm like, okay, the light bulb went off. And that's when I started making the transition and was able to do more of a novel approach versus a screenplay. But it was a lot harder than I thought, for sure.
I love that you had Hunger Games as some inspiration there. There's definitely a little Hunger Games vibe in the book. I feel that. The details that you gave in the book really transported the reader to the 1930s, the uncertainty of the Depression right before World War II. What research did you do? I know that you spoke with your family a lot, but was there other research that you did in order to really get a picture of the period?
Yeah, I mean, well, so there's two buckets. One bucket is the research on the Bund, what was going on, and one of the most poignant pieces of research that I found was I found 12 boxes of these diaries that there was a newspaper man, his name was John Metcalf, and he had gone undercover with his brother, who was actually in the FBI, for 6 months to, he went undercover as a German-American Bund, and he became, it was the equivalent of the SS, which was the secret police in Germany. It was called the OD here. And he kept these incredible notes. And then there was this 14-day series newspaper afterwards. But for instance, there's a scene in my book where where Yael is initiated into the secret police. And that was one where I took all the details from what John Metcalf had written. And the level of detail was so incredible that I even remember one of the pieces in these boxes that I found in the archives. It was like an old restaurant receipt, and he had written notes on the back. And in my mind, I remember him thinking, me thinking he must have been hiding and like just writing down some notes so that none of the guys would see him, and sort of sticking that in his pocket. So that was one of the big authentic parts that I tried to adapt into this book. The other one was my mom, as you said, family, and her cousin. And I would whatever it was, 2 years or whatever, I would talk to my mom like every single day. And I'm like, okay, Mom, explain to me, how did you take out the trash? And how did you, were there showers? And how did you buy, how did you buy your food? And then I talked to her cousin about so her cousin's father was Longy's Woman's barber. And I'm like, what was it like? And when he came over, what was it like? And were you scared? And were you, so I think it was that combination. And then probably the third piece that was really interesting was my mom went to the big Jewish high school, is called Weequahic High School, which is the one that's in Plot Against America, if anybody saw that. And my mom's an alumni, and we emailed the alumni and said, if anybody was a Newark Minuteman or father or grandfather was a Newark Minuteman, will you send us anecdotes? Because none of this stuff is printed up, because a lot of these stories were undercover. I mean, it was the mob and the government working together. These stories aren't printed. They are here and there. There are dribbles of them. There's one other writer that did a nonfiction about them, but otherwise, these stories haven't been unearthed. And so anyway, all these people wrote us all these anecdotes about when my father was a Minuteman, they, went and took stink bombs or whatever and threw them in the meeting, and all kinds of stories that I incorporated into the story.
Yeah, on that, how important was it for you to make the story as historically accurate as possible? And can you talk a little bit about where you took creative liberties and like what portions? I know you said you might mention more like where the timeline was stretched or shifted.
Sure. So I definitely started out as it was like a research project, because as I said, I was obsessed with understanding this period, and I created this whole timeline and just started filling it in with all of these factual things. And so the timeline and events, all of them are either true or condensed, where there might be a riot, and I've combined 2 riots. But a lot of the characters are real characters: Fritz Kuhn, Longy's Woman, all of the Newark Minutemen, my uncle. But the 2 heroes, while they're based on real people, the love story itself is fictionalized. So Yael is based on this character, John Metcalf, who went undercover for, I said, 6 months. And the girl was, her real name was Helen Vrurus. And she, I found her testimony in the FBI documents, and also her story in another magazine, where she was the girl that was raped in the Nazi camps. And so I sort of took their 2 stories and then fictionalized it. But again, because a lot of this wasn't told, I sort of had to fill in my imagination based on facts, what this, what could have been happening. But I did, my whole goal was to make this authentic as possible, and to sort of leave a legacy of at least a flavor of my family history. And my mom is featured in it, and her father and mother, and some of their friends.
Was there anything that you learned about the era through your research that most surprised you that you did incorporate?
Probably the biggest vibe that I learned that I didn't understand, and then I bridge it to today, is how unstable we were in the 30s. I mean, we read about that, but nobody trusted anyone in terms of, am I going to have a job tomorrow? Am I going to eat tomorrow? What is this democracy? Is it working? Is it not working? And by really trying to put myself in my mom's shoes, and also older people from that generation, which there's not a lot of them left yet, the vibe that and by the way, my mom's cousin said that. She said this. She said, you know, we were kids. My mom was a teenager. She said, even though all this stuff was going on, she goes, it was fun. We loved it because we all lived close together. It was our life. It's what we knew. Yet, I guess it was the adults that understood, you know, is democracy was being threatened. And, you know, I've talked to some Jewish homes and some older people, and hopefully they feel better now, but a couple months ago, they were terrified about what was happening to our country. So that kind of smacked me in the face. And I think the one other thing that I got a new understanding about was how much our mafia held up our country. And maybe those go hand in hand, but again, because it was the mafia, both Italian and Jewish. Some people don't even realize we had a Jewish mafia, but that it was the mafia that had that money, and so they were kind of holding our country up in a way. I may be giving them too much credit, but I really think that some of our survival and I know, for instance, my mom's brothers pretty much all worked for Longy's woman. You know, one was the boxer, one, they call it running the numbers, which they had numbers and gamble. One would run down to the horse tracks. So they would do that kind, hopefully not other kind. But the whole neighborhood worked for Longy, and Longy supported, he would create soup kitchens, and everybody loved him. Everybody loved him because he would help my mom's cousins escape from Germany through, you know, not just money, but political ways, undercover paperwork, that sort of thing. And that gave me a new appreciation about the mafia.
The book centers around this soldier athlete who is both a boxer and a fighter in the training as a German. Did you feel like it was important for you to tell a story about the strength of a Jewish man who could literally fight for his people? Do you feel like that's a story that's often told in Jewish spaces?
Well, I think that some people are surprised that there were so many Jewish boxers and that these guys were such tough guys. But I think it's an important story. And in fact, one of the stories I sort of allude to is there, you know, a lot of these, there was a question of why were there so many Jewish boxing champions during the 20s and 30s? And in the story, there's somebody's explaining it to somebody. They're like, you don't understand. These are the guys or sons of guys that escaped the Russian pogroms, where they were, if they weren't fighting back, they were dead. They were killed. So these are really tough guys. And then I overlay this sort of biblical anecdote about King David, who had these, and I don't tell many people this, but you guys will know it now, the secret number 37, that King David had these 37 superheroes, almost warriors, and Longy compares his boxers to the 37. And in fact, my daughter's writing a song for the audiobook, and she uses the number 37 in it a lot. But yeah, I mean, you hear about, well, why didn't the Jews fight back? More, I guess, over in Germany, but many of them did. And there were these groups, these really strong groups that weren't going to stand for being persecuted once again.
On that note, some Jews, some organizations might feel it gives Jews a bad name to be engaged in brawling or fighting, and that the government ought to take care of, fighting what's going on. Did you encounter people who were opposed to you telling this story, or folks who don't necessarily think that it's the best light for Jews to be shown in?
Well, it's funny, there's an article, and the title of the article, it's not about my article, it was a different article, but when is it okay to punch a Nazi? And it kind of goes to this question. And I think the answer is, there was a small town in, I believe it was Connecticut. I don't know if it was Connecticut or New Jersey, but there's a story about them. And the Nazis were taking over their town, and they didn't want it. And by the way, they were German Americans. They were not German Nazi Americans, but there were a lot of German Americans in this town. And because of First Amendment rights, they couldn't stop federally, they couldn't stop them. So they said, as a town, they're crossing the line. They're taking our rights away from us. And so they created, they fought back, and from a grassroots point, they fought against these Nazis. And I think that's what this story is about, that it's more of a resistance, and it's more of these guys were more of a resistance that were trying to, from a grassroots, because federally they couldn't really do anything. They were trying to stop something that they knew what was happening in Germany. People were ignoring it. And it's a great question, when do you not cross the line? Is it okay? That's a bad word, but to turn to violence, we never want to do that. But it's a great question. And I mean, I endorse it because of the times. The times were rougher. The times were a lot rougher then. I mean, you had the mafia, people were walking around with guns. So you got to, first of all, think, what was it like back then? And then you got to put your ear to the ground and say, what is the threat that's happening? I think in today's time, it's a little bit different. Well, maybe it's not, I shouldn't say that, but I guess it has to do with the motivation, and I don't know. It's a great question.
I read that there were not only Jews as a part of the Newark Minutemen, but also Italians and Irishmen. Did you come across any of their stories in your research?
Well, there was one of the biggest stories was, gosh, am I going to be able to remember his name? There was a big boxing fight, and it was a German boxer against one of our black boxers. And that was a big story about how he was a symbol of fighting the Nazis as well, and how important it was for him to win, to get sort of America behind it. But certainly there were many immigrant groups that were boxers, and they joined in. And, the Nazis persecuted more than the Jews. They did not want anybody different, whether, you were gay or straight, or I mean, if you were gay or black or a communist or a cripple, they were against all those guys. So certainly all of those different groups rallied, but it was really, I guess it was because the Jewish mob was spearheading it, that it were these Jewish boxers that were sort of at the center.
When reading the book, it's hard to imagine this world in which there's a star-crossed love between a Jewish American boxer and the German American Nazi leader's daughter, or that it would be successful. How do we reconcile that as readers, or how did that storyline come to you?
Oh my God, a rabbi asked me that, and I was like, that's a hard question, but here's how I did it. I don't want to give anything away, but it's a great question. And number one, the reason I didn't make it YA was because I would have had to really go to a sensitivity editor about that, about a Jewish guy or person being together with a Nazi person and a romanticizing that. But without giving anything away, number one, first of all, the girl is a German American Nazi, which is a little bit different, but still she had the ideals. But I asked my mom, how do I do this? How do I reconcile that? And she gave me the answer, and I'm not going to give it away. I'm going to make you read the book, but hopefully what I did solves the problem. And in fact, it's so Yael, while Yael's character arc is pretty much set, as a young child, he sees his father horribly mutilated. And so his character arc stays straight. He's all about revenge. And it's really Krista whose character arc evolves and changes. And you aren't sure where she's going to go because, of course, it's her family, and she's a German American, and she's actually there's a triangle love affair going on where she's been betrothed to a Nazi boy, and that's her future. But you're going to have to read the book to see how that's reconciled. But so I can't give it away, Amanda.
I will give it away either. Don't worry.
Okay.
So my last question, and we'll move to some participant questions. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on with the movie adaptation? I know you've been signed for rights to a movie.
Yes.
When can we look forward to a trailer or any exciting news on that front?
Yeah, so yes, I've sold the movie rights, and right now the status, it's to a group called Fulwell 73, and they're these 4 Jewish guys from the UK, and their 5th partner is James Corden from The Late Late Show, and their film office here is in the CBS lot. And where we are right now is we've attached 2 high-level screenwriters because I'm just a first-time screenwriter, so they're pretty high-powered screenwriters, and they've been announced. And there is a Variety article you can read about on my website about them and their background and everything. And then we are talking to a very hot director right now, and I'm crossing my fingers because he'd be so perfect. And then we have to see with COVID, when we could actually start a filming project like a historical fiction. I'd love to have it. I'm sort of keep hinting to have it filmed in Newark, where a lot of movies are being filmed now. But you guys can all, if you come up to Newark, we'll get everybody in it to be extras or whatever. So that's where I am. It's moving along, which I'm thankful for because a lot of projects have been canceled with this whole new world, but it's moving. People are still very excited about it, and it's still very timely.
Someone asked about another author who wrote about the Newark Minutemen. Are you aware of another book? Did you mention that?
There's one called, I actually have it over there. It's called Nazis in Newark, maybe. That is, so that's a nonfiction, and it's sort of a, it's a nonfiction, and it was written a bit ago by, what's his name? Grover, I forget his last name, Grover something. But yes, he did an incredible research, and a lot of his papers are in the Newark Library, which I actually did a talk with the Newark Library, which was really great because they knew something about this, and we were comparing and what's real, what's not. But other than that, there's never been a fiction. There's one called Swastika Nation that touches on this, but there's never been a fiction and a level of of deep understanding of the Newark Minutemen. There is another, it's called Nazis in Hollywood or something like that. It's different. It's about the German American Nazis were out to assassinate all of the like the Warner Brothers and Charlie Chaplin, and then there was a group that internally disrupted that. But that's a little different too. So you do see little pieces. Plot Against America was the Philip Roth one that alluded to this. That's a dystopian one where Roosevelt dies, I think, and Charles Lindbergh becomes president. And I tell people, so that was 1940. This is sort of the real life prequel to that dystopian story, but you may get some of the names or details in that book too. So I'm not sure if that was one of them they were thinking about.
There was a question about when you refer to the government as saying like the government wasn't taking care of what was happening. And I know in the book, there's a little tension maybe between the FBI versus the police. Who are you referring to when you speak of the government not or are cracking down on the Nazis versus the mob and who they were aligned with?
Well, in general, because of First Amendment, as I said, the government couldn't really stop them. The second level was back then, if you know about the FBI, is our FBI was just forming. And, Hoover he was the director. He was just starting the fingerprinting program, but they weren't like the FBI that we know today. Specifically, what happened, what's documented is that a judge, with the encouragement of some other people in the government, I'm not going to go as far as say Mayor LaGuardia was one of them, but it was New York. And the documented is that this judge, federal judge, he was the one that went to Meyer Lansky and asked him for help. It's funny, I just found something else that and then the third thing is this research that I did with the two brothers, one being in the FBI, one working for the Chicago Daily News, where they were working together to go undercover to try to at least learn about, understand what was going on, or stop the German America Bund at the time. And in fact, John Metcalf, he became so in the inner circle that Fritz Kuhn wanted him to go meet with Hitler, and the FBI said, no, we're not going to put your life at risk. But that was the kind of collaboration or kind of puzzling together at the time to solve this problem that was going on.
We do have a request for you to read an excerpt. If you have an excerpt that you have read for talks or one that comes
Sure.
to mind.
Let me, I got to go grab a book, but hold on one sec.
Okay, great.
Let me.
And if there are any other questions, this is your time now to post them in the chat. We probably have time for one or two more.
Okay, so this is the cover, by the way, and I just want to show you, this was actually a real picture. You guys saw some of the real pictures, but I was able to use this real picture, and you can see these guys are walking down New York Avenue, or one of the main avenues, and you've got the Nazi flag and the American flag, and that was the kind of presence these groups had. So what I'll do is I'll just start. So the way my book is structured is its bookend, it starts and ends with the scene that you just saw, the video in Madison Square Garden. And so I'll just read you, it's first person, and this is Yael talking. This is the prologue. And so what's going to happen is it's that 1939 event, and then the book goes back to when he's a boy, and then it will end at this event. So I'll just read you a little bit about this. So this is Madison Square Garden, New York, 1939 on President's Day. And Yael says, "If we fail today, we might as well throw in the towel. My ears hammer against the roaring crowd. We must stop the rallying cry for a Nazi party in America. The last thing we need in the middle of the Depression is a fascist party here to support the one Nazis are building in Germany. Everyone's still nursing their wounds from the Great War. I catch the cold iron bar, the one I spent all night sawing off with my hacksaw on the first bounce, but the clank it makes between Sig Heil chants signals our death warrant. My heart freezes as I scan 40,000 blinking eyes around the arena. I wonder which ones have read through my fake salute. Blood thrust through my veins like water loading in a fire hose. I almost vomit. Dang it, I am my own worst enemy." So, is that good? That's how it starts. Boom.
The tension is building, definitely. I think someone wrote in the chat, it's a real page turner. Absolutely. It is, it's not a book for the faint of heart. It's it's going to be an action-packed movie as well, I assume.
Yeah, no, it was written to be a movie, and you might feel some of that. I am more of a screenwriter than an author, but hopefully I've made an okay transition to the story. But yes, lots of action and heroics.
It's a good book to take you out of wherever you are. It'll completely distract you from whatever's happening in the news and take you to another world.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight and asking questions. And as I said at the start, if you have suggestions or ideas or feedback about the programming that we offer at the JCC, I would love to hear from you. My name is Amanda again, and thank you, Leslie, for joining us. I put your website in the chat, and I will follow up with everyone who registered for the event with the recording for this evening. And thank you for being here this evening.
Great, thank you so much. And if anybody reaches out, feel free to share my email, or you can contact me through the website too with any questions, or if you want to be in the movie or whatever. Yeah.
Have a good evening, everyone. I'll hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye.